The alarm did not wake me. I was already awake. I had been standing at the observation window for 2 hours watching the conclave station rotate slowly against the stars, its light steady and golden, like the face of something that had never doubted itself. I had my dress uniform on, pressed in, clean, and my hands were folded behind my back the way my father taught me. Before he passed, he used to say that a man who holds himself well is a man who believes in what he is doing. I believed in what we were doing. My name is Arlen Voss. I was 41 years old, and for the last 7 of those years I had served as Earth Senior Diplomatic Attaché to the Galactic Conclave. I had shaken hands, or the alien equivalent, with representatives of 39 species. I had memorized their customs, their honorifics, their preferred negotiating distances. I had eaten food that tasted like wet metal and smiled. I had sat through 18-hour sessions where beings older than human civilization debated the placement of a comma in a treaty clause, and I had not once lost my patience. Today was the day it all paid off. The sovereignty accords were being ratified in 6 hours, 40 years of effort, by every diplomat, scientist, and politician Earth had ever produced. Formal entry into the Galactic Conclave. Full membership, real protection, real trade, 7 colonies and 1 home planet finally given the same standing as every other civilization in this arm of the galaxy. I turned from the window and poured myself a cup of coffee. Real coffee, shipped from Brazil, 4 months old and worth every credit I paid for it. I sat down at my small desk and read the final draft of the Accords one more time. I had read it so many times the words had stopped looking like words, but I read it again because that is what you do when the stakes are that high. Lieutenant Nina Hart knocked on my door at exactly 7:00 in the morning. She was 26, sharp as broken glass, and had the particular quality of making you feel like every piece of information she delivered had already been sorted and confirmed twice before she opened mouth. All delegations confirmed present. Commander, she said, the ceremony begins at 1300. Anyone unusual in the corridor? Traffic, I asked. The Veth delegation arrived 2 hours early, she said. They requested additional technical access to the station's communication nodes. The station master approved it. I looked at her. For what reason? Cultural broadcast rights, she said. They want to transmit the ceremony back to their home systems in real time. I held the coffee cup in both hands and thought about that for 1 second. Veth Dominion had been our closest partner in the negotiations. They had vouched for Earth at the conclave table 3 separate times in the last decade. Their ambassador, a tall being named Counselor Dreth, had spent 4 years building a personal relationship with our team. He called it a friendship. I had called it a friendship too. Fine, I said. The ceremony was held in the Great Hall of the station, a circular chamber large enough to park a cargo freighter in. The ceiling was a dome of transparent material, and through it you could see the stars and the shapes of a dozen alien vessels docked at their berths, including the 3 Earth ships that had carried our delegation, the Wardens, the Capstone, and the Meridian Light Escort vessels, ceremonial for this trip. I stood in the gallery with Nina and 4 other members of the human delegation as the conclave speaker read The final articles of the Accords aloud. His voice came through the translation. Feed soft and measured, around the floor. Below, 39 species sat in there. Designated sections, some of them I recognized by shape alone after years of this work. Some of them still made the back of my neck feel strange. The vote passed unanimously. A sound rose in the chamber that was not quite applause because most of the species present did not have hands the right shape for it, but it was the closest translation of approval that 39 different biologies could produce at once, and it filled the dome and bounced off the stars above us, and I felt something loosen in my chest that had been wound tight for 7 years. Nina touched my arm. Congratulations, Commander. I opened my mouth to answer her, and every light in the station went out. Not a flicker, not a failure. They went out the way a switch turns off all at once total. The emergency systems came on 2 seconds. Later, red and low, and in that red light I watched the great hall below me go from celebration to confusion in the space of a breath. Voices rose, translation feeds crackled. Someone near the front of the floor made a sound I had never heard from any species before, and I did not want to hear it again. Nina's handheld communication device buzzed. She looked at it, and her face did something I had never seen her face do in 3 years of working together. The Wardens is not responding, she said. The capstone is not responding. The Meridian is not responding. I grabbed the device from her and sent a direct ping to Captain Leon Graves on the Wardens. Leon was the kind of man who answered communications in his sleep. Nothing came back. I sent the same ping to every human vessel in the system, 16 in total, including the 2 light patrol ships stationed at the jump point 60,000 km out. Nothing. 16 ships, nothing. Nina, I said, get to the emergency dock now. She was already moving. I looked back at the great hall through the gallery window. The conclave speaker was attempting to restore order. Alien security personnel in their various forms of armor were moving through the crowd, but near the Veth section, I noticed something that cut through the noise in my mind like a blade. Counselor Dreth was not in his seat. Counselor Dreth was not in the hall. I had worked with Dreth for 4 years. I had shared meals with him. I had told him things about Earth that were not classified but were private. The kind of things you say to someone when you believe they are on your side. I had, in the precise and quiet way that lonely diplomatic work produces, trusted him. I left the gallery at a run. The docking corridor was a long white tube lit only by the emergency strips. Along the floor, Nina was 40 m ahead of me, moving fast, her boots loud on the metal. 2 human security officers from our detail were already there when we arrived at the dock entrance. They were trying to raise the ships on every frequency. One of them, a young man named Oliver Hayes, looked at me with an expression that told me everything before he spoke. "They're all dark, sir," he said. "Engines, communications, navigation, life support backups, everything that runs through the main firmware. All of it." I stood very still for a moment. The navigation firmware, it had been updated across the entire Earth fleet 8 months ago during what was officially called a routine interoperability sync with Conclave technical standards. The update had been certified by the Veth Technical Bureau, who had offered their expertise as part of the Partnership agreement. I thought about Counselor Dreth. Requesting extra access to the stations. Communication nodes this morning. I thought about the word partnership. What's the status of the colonies? I said. Oliver checked his device. His hand was not steady. New Eden Proxima. Settlement in Kepler 4 are not responding on any channel, sir. 3 colonies, 53 million people, and our entire fleet sitting dark in space. Like steel coffins. Nina was at the emergency terminal on the wall trying to manually open a channel to Earth itself. I watched her try 4 times, each time the indicator light turned red. Jammed, she said quietly. The station shook. It was a single low vibration, the kind that travels through the metal of the hall and into your feet and tells you something large has impacted something else at significant speed far away. I pressed my hand against the wall and felt it hum. That came from the jump point, Oliver said, looking at his scanner. Something just came through, a lot of somethings. Through the porthole at the end of the corridor I could see the shapes of ships, too many ships, moving in formation in the dark between the stars, with the quiet confidence of things that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Veth ships, hundreds of them. I had read once in a history of Earth's own old conflicts that the worst thing a person can experience is not fear, but the moment they understand that everything they believed was solid was hollow all along and has been hollow for some time, and everyone else knew it except them. That is what I felt standing in that corridor. I turned to Nina. She was looking at me, waiting. I thought about 53 million people on 3 colonies. I thought about 7 billion people on Earth. I thought about 16 dark ships. I thought about 40 years of work and a unanimous vote and the coffee I had drunk this morning while reading a treaty that apparently meant nothing. And then I stopped feeling what I felt, because feeling it was not useful. There is a salvage courier docked in Bay 7, I said. It belongs to the Kepler Trade Commission. It runs on pre-conclave systems, independent firmware, nothing that went through the sink. Nina's eyes sharpened. It might fly. We are going to find out, I said. Oliver, take your partner and stay here. If anyone from the conclave comes looking for the human delegation, you were never in this corridor. And you, sir, he said. I was already walking. Bay 7 was at the far end of the station's lower ring, past 3 security checkpoints that were running on emergency power and therefore operating on manual override, which meant they were not operating at all. We moved through them without slowing. The courier was a battered thing, a mid-range hauler that had probably carried grain and industrial parts for 20 years, painted the faded orange of the Kepler Commission and smelling of recycled air and engine sealant. I ran a quick check. The firmware was old. It was clean. The engines were small and slow and would take 6 hours to reach the jump point. 6 hours was fine. Nina took the co-pilot seat and began the ignition sequence without being asked. She had not panicked once. I made a note of that, the way you make notes of things that matter for later. I sat in the pilot chair and pulled up the communication console. Basic system. Limited range but functional. I thought about what to send. Not a report, not a request for help. There was no help coming. Whatever was happening at the colonies was already happening, and whatever was waiting at Earth had probably already arrived, and anything I sent on an open channel would be intercepted by the Veth fleet in seconds. But there was one channel, one frequency, buried in the deep band spectrum, hidden inside the harmonic of a standard distress beacon known only to 6 people alive, put there by a man named Admiral Jeffrey Cole, who had retired 2 years ago after a very quiet conversation with a very small group of people who had wondered privately whether the galaxy could ever be fully trusted. I had been in that conversation. I had argued against it at the time. I had thought it was paranoid. I keyed the frequency and transmitted one word: Prometheus. Then I released the docking clamps and flew us into the dark. The Veth fleet did not stop us. We were one small orange holler among the noise of an entire station going into lockdown. We were nothing worth noticing. I flew with both hands on the controls and did not look back at the station. I did not look at the dark shapes of the human ships hanging motionless in the distance. I looked at the jump point ahead and I thought about what came next. Not revenge, not yet. Something colder and more useful than revenge. Patience. I had a great deal of it now. We hit the jump threshold and the stars stretched and we were gone. 11 years is a long time to be invisible. I know that sounds simple when you say it in one sentence, but try to understand what it meant in practice. 11 years of no communications leaving the lunar complex, 11 years of supply runs made by unmarked vessels on rotating schedules, time to look like routine commercial traffic. 11 years of people living and working in a facility carved out of the moon's far side under 300 m of rock with no windows and recycled air that always tasted faintly of iron, no matter how many times we cleaned the filters. 11 years of building something the galaxy did not know existed. My name is still Arlen Voss. I am 52 years old now, and I look at the lunar facility is not a kind place for skin or sleep, but I'm here sitting in the command chair of a warship that did not exist 11 years ago, in a fleet that should not be possible, preparing to do something the Conclave has told itself for 4 decades could never happen. They were wrong. They were wrong because they made the same mistake that every power makes when it decides to crush something smaller than itself. They assumed that a people who lost everything would spend their grief on grief. We spent it on work. Let me tell you how it began. When Nina and I came through the jump point on that old orange courier and dropped into the Kepler system, we expected to find smoke. We expected to find a colony in chains. What we found instead was something that took me a full minute to process. The colony was intact, or most of it was, but it was not free. Veth ground forces had moved in within hours of the firmware attack, and the colonists, nearly 18 million people, were being organized. Sorted was the word one of them later used, sorted by age, health, and skill. It was efficient, it was methodical, and it was the clearest possible statement about what the Veth intended to do with humanity long-term. Nina and I did not land. We observed from distance, pulled the data we needed, and kept moving. The signal I had sent from the station brought a response 12 hours later, decoded in the old band through our courier's antenna. 6 words and a set of coordinates deep in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. The response came from a man named Colonel Henry Ward. Henry was 58 at the time, a compact and deliberate man who had spent 30 years in Earth's Defensive Space Corps before retiring to what the public records described as an agricultural consultancy on the lunar surface. He had 22 people with him when Nina and I arrived. He had a facility that had been under construction for 6 years, funded through a network of shell accounts and private donations from people who had shared the quiet worry that something was coming. He also had 4 incomplete warship frames in dry dock. I walked through that facility the first time and felt 2 things at once. The first was something close to grief, because 4 frames were not a fleet and the world I had come from was already gone. The second was something that surprised me. It was possibility, not hope. Exactly, something more structural than hope. The snort's recognition that a foundation existed, however small, and that a foundation can be built on. How many people know this is here? I asked Henry. 22, he said. How many more can you reach through the network? He thought about it. Maybe 300 quietly. Reach them, I said. Over the next 8 months, we grew to 900 people. They came in small groups in civilian vessels at irregular intervals using cover identities that Henry's network had prepared years in advance. They were engineers, pilots, military officers who had survived the initial collapse, doctors, physicists, metallurgists, 2 people who had spent their careers studying VETH engineering, and who were, in the language of what came next, worth more than anyone else in the facility combined. Their names were Carol Green and Peter Shaw. Carol was 44, small and fast-talking, with a habit of finishing her sentences halfway through because her mind had already moved on. Peter was older, 60, slow-moving and exact, the kind of man who measured twice and did not bother cutting until he was certain. They had worked together for 8 years at a university research program, studying galactic drive technology. They had published nothing in 3 years, which was not because they had found nothing. It was because what they found was not something they wanted to share. The Conclave's drive technology hasn't changed fundamentally in 200 years. Carol told me 3 weeks after she arrived. We were in her workspace, long room full of screens and physical models and 3 cups of cold coffee she had apparently forgotten about. It's efficient, it's stable, it's completely optimized for the physics they understand. And what physics don't they understand? I said. Peter handed me a single page of mathematics. I'm not a physicist, but I could see that it was dense and original, and that Carol was watching my face with the specific expression of someone who has been waiting a long time to show this to someone who had the authority to act on it. Fold compression, Carol said, not a jump, not a transition point, an actual spatial fold held open long enough to move a ship through it from the inside of an enemy formation. You can do that, I said. We can try, Peter said. How long to build a working prototype in this facility with what we have? Carol said 18 months. I looked at Henry, who was standing in the doorway with his arms crossed. We need a bigger facility, I said. The expansion took 2 years, not because of engineering, because of secrecy. Every new section of the lunar complex had to be dug quietly, the material dispersed across dozens of dummy mining operations that Henry's network maintained on the surface. Every Shipment of raw material had to move through channels that looked like commercial traffic and nothing else. Every person we brought in was assessed, verified, and brought through individually. We lost 3 people in that period, not to the VETH, to accidents. The work was hard and the conditions were unforgiving, and I stood at 3 small memorial services in a room carved out of moon rock and said words that I meant, and that no one outside those walls would ever hear. Those 3 people are part of why what we built was worth building. By the 4th year we had the prototype Carol and Peter's fold compression drive fit inside a modified hole the size of a light escort vessel, and on the day we tested it for the first time, the entire facility went quiet in a way I had never heard before, and have not heard since. 900 people stopped what they were doing and watched the feed from the test cameras. The ship disappeared from its position in the asteroid belt. 6 seconds later it reappeared inside a marked boundary, 40,000 km away, not at the boundary. Inside it, it had folded through the space between. Carol was crying, Peter was standing very still with his hands at his sides, and I realized after a moment that he was shaking. I turned to the room and said, "Build it." In the warships. That was the beginning of the fleet. Over the next 5 years, the 4 original frames became 40, then 100. Then as we refined the production process and recruited more engineers and expanded the dry dock sections 3 more times, 400, then 800, then in the final 2 years before we launched, 1,400. 1,400 warships built in secret under the surface of the moon by human hands using human ingenuity that owed nothing to any conclave technical standard or VETH firmware update. Some of the ships were large, some were compact and fast. All of them carried the fold drive. All of them ran on firmware written entirely by our own people, line by line, verified and re-verified until there was not a single character in any of it that had not been placed there deliberately by someone we trusted. We named the fleet Operation Prometheus. It was the only name that made sense. The internal debates were real, and they were hard. I want to be clear about that, because it would be easy, looking back, to describe those 11 years as unified and purposeful from start to finish. They were not. People disagreed. People argued. In the 7th year, a faction of about 200, led by a quiet and thoughtful pilot named Grace Ellison, proposed that we send a delegation to the conclave before launching. They believed that the political situation might have shifted. They believed that some member species might be willing to advocate for Earth's reinstatement. I listened to Grace for 2 hours. She was intelligent, and she was not wrong that the political situation had shifted somewhat. 2 minor species had lodged formal protests about the VETH action. The conclave had issued a statement acknowledging that the sovereignty accords had been disrupted. A statement. 53 million people on 3 colonies, still sorted and assigned and working in conditions that the conclave's own charter defined as unlawful. 7 billion people on Earth were living under a quiet occupation that expressed itself not in visible force but in controlled trade, monitored communications, and a set of economic agreements that the VETH had imposed in the 1st year, and that left Earth functional but dependent and unable to refuse. A statement was not an answer to that. I told Grace that I understood her position, and that I believed she was acting from genuine care for human lives. I told her that I shared that care, and then I asked her one question. If we go to the conclave now, I said, with nothing but our history and our arguments, what do we have that we did not have 40 years ago? She thought about it for a long time. Then she said, nothing. If we go to the conclave after, I said, we have demonstrated consequence. We have shown that choosing the wrong position on humanity carries a cost. That is the only currency the conclave has ever respected. The vote was close. The final count was 461 in favor of proceeding, 458 in favor of the diplomatic approach. 3 votes. Grace voted to proceed. I thanked her for that. Later, she said she still believed in diplomacy. She just believed in being heard first. In the 10th year, Carol Green had a stroke. She survived it, but her speech was slow afterward, and her right hand did not work properly. She kept working. She was in her workspace 14 hours a day, using her left hand with Peter beside her, and she oversaw the installation of the fold drives in the final 300 ships from a chair they had built for her near the main console. She told me once that she was not going to let 11 years of work sit in dry dock because her brain had made a poor decision. I told her I felt the same way about the conclave. On launch day, the far side surface was empty because it was always empty, and the rock above us split open the way we had designed it to. The panels retracting on their hydraulic joints, and the first ships rose into the dark above the moon without lights, without engine trails brighter than necessary, in a silence that lasted until they cleared the surface, and Nina, sitting next to me in the command chair of a ship we had named the Reckoning, said quietly, "They're clear." I watched the feed as ship after ship rose and formed up silently, the shapes of them dark against the stars, and then the full formation came together, and I saw what we had built for the first time as a single thing. 1,400 warships, human-made, human-crewed, running on human ingenuity, carrying technology that no one else in the galaxy had. The chair I sat in was not the kind you sink into. It was firm and upright and practical, and I sat in it the way my father taught me to hold myself, and I felt, for the first time in 11 years, the thing I had been waiting to feel. We were not finished grieving. We would probably never finish, but we were done waiting. I keyed the fleet-wide channel. All vessels, this is the Reckoning. Navigation confirms jump coordinates. We move in 10 minutes. You know what we are doing, and you know why. There is nothing I need to add to that. I paused. Bring us home. The stars shifted as the fleet aligned. Somewhere behind us, under 300 m of moon rock, Carol Green was watching a feed from a camera attached to the outside of the facility, and Peter Shaw was standing next to her with his hand on her shoulder, watching 1,400 ships rise and move and go, and I did not know that until much later, but when I found out, I was glad. The fold drives activated together, and in a single moment that registered on no conclave sensor array as anything recognizable. The Prometheus fleet was gone. The admiral's name was Betrayal, and he was laughing when he hailed us. I had been told this sometimes happened. The Veth as a species expressed contempt through a particular vocalization that translated roughly as amusement, and when Betrayal saw the Formation of human ships holding position on the edge of his border. System, he did what his culture told him to do. He laughed. I let him finish. The cattle have built ships, he said. The translation came through flat and even the way all translations do, but the meaning underneath it was clear. How long did that take you? A decade in a cave somewhere. I was sitting in my command chair on the reckoning, and I want to be honest, I had imagined this moment many times in 11 years. I had imagined what I would say. I had written and discarded 100 versions of it. Some of them were long, some of them were sharp. Some of them were things I am glad I never said. What I actually said was nothing. Instead, I transmitted a file. It was 800 lines of code, dense, specific, precisely formatted. It was the original firmware that the VETH Technical Bureau had installed across the Earth fleet 11 years ago. Backdoor, the hidden clause buried in the navigation software that had gone dark on the day of the ratification ceremony and left 16 ships cold and silent, and a station full of people watching VETH warships pour through jump point. But it was not just the original code. Carol and Peter had spent 2 years taking it apart. They had found every line, every trigger, every hidden process. They had understood it the way you understand something when you are furious and precise and have nothing but time. And then they had rewritten it. The file I transmitted to VETH Kale's fleet was not a message. It was the same firmware repurposed with one change. The trigger was now our signal and the targets were now his ships. I gave it 4 seconds to propagate through his fleet's network. The VETH shared firmware updates across their vessels automatically during formation, a convenience feature designed for efficiency. Then I sent the activation signal. 240 VETH warships went dark. Not all of them. The outer pickets, the vessels that had not fully synchronized with the formation's network yet, remained active, but the core of his fleet, the flagships, the carriers, the heavy escorts, went quiet in the space of 4 seconds, hanging in the dark around their station, exactly the way our ships had hung around Conclave Station 11 years ago. VETH Kale's laughter had stopped. He was still on the open channel. I could hear the sounds of his bridge. Behind his silence, voices calling out status reports, alerts sounding the specific quality of noise that a command deck makes when the people on it suddenly understand that something has gone very wrong and they do not know how wrong yet. I want to be clear about what we did next, because it was not what many people would have done, and I knew at the time that some of my own crew were expecting something different. We did not press the advantage. We did not capitalize on 240 dark ships the way a military doctrine written in anger would have told us to. I had spent 11 years thinking about what came after this moment, and I had made a decision that I had argued for and defended and believed in. The point was not to equal what was done to us. The point was to make the galaxy understand that we existed, that we remembered, and that we had come back with a precision that made us more frightening than any act of pure destruction could. I gave the order. 260 Reckoning-class vessels moved into the border system on fold drives, emerging directly alongside the dark VETH ships before any picket vessel could respond. Each Reckoning class carried a boarding team of 60 people trained for the last 3 Years in entry procedures, emergency care, and one very specific task. They were there to bring people home. In the 6 border system installations, the Veth controlled in this region, there were human laborers. Some of them had been taken from the colonies, some were the children of people taken from the colonies, some were young enough that they did not remember Earth and had been told by the Veth that humanity was a failed species that had been absorbed for its own good. We went to every installation, every cell block, every work facility, every registration point. We moved quickly and we moved carefully, and we did not leave without accounting for every human name on the manifest lists we had compiled from intercepted Veth administrative traffic over 11 years. It took 6 hours. While the boarding teams worked, I kept the reckoning on station near Veth Kale's flagship, and I kept the channel open. He did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice had changed. The amusement was gone. What was left was something more careful. "What do you want?" he said. "I have what I want," I said. "Your people are alive. Your ships will restart when we leave. You will find that your firmware has been cleaned, not compromised, cleaned. We do not leave traps. That is not who we are." A pause. "You are releasing my fleet?" "Yes." "Why?" I thought about how to answer that. Nina was watching me from the co-pilot seat, and I could see in her expression that she was curious about this too. She had been with me from the first day. She deserved an honest answer as much as he did, because the point is not to do to you what you did to us, I said. The point is to demonstrate that we could, and to make clear that what we choose to do instead is our decision, not our limitation. Another pause. Longer. "You're going to broadcast this," he said. "I already have," I said, "on every conclave frequency in real time since the moment we arrived." I let that settle. The conclave would be watching. Every member species, every diplomat, every governing body in this arm of the galaxy would have seen what a human fleet arrived looking like, what it did when it had the advantage, and what it chose not to do. They would have seen the firmware, they would have seen the boarding teams, they would have seen the people coming home. I picked up the data pad from the arm of my chair and read from it one time. "Counselor Dreth extended you a personal greeting," I said, "or rather the encrypted record of Dreth's personal communication to your Admiralty on the day of the ratification ceremony, detailing the timing and trigger sequence of the attack. We have had that recording for 4 years. We will be submitting it to the Conclave Investigative Chamber upon our return to Earth system." I set the pad down. "Give Dreth my regards." I closed the channel. Nina was already running the jump calculations. Around us, the boarding ships were completing their returns, hatches sealing, formation tightening. "Last team is aboard," she said. "Everyone accounted for." I looked at the count on my screen. 4,207 people recovered from this system alone. Not a single one of them had known when they woke up this morning that today was the day they were going home. "Corset," I said. "Set," Nina said. "Take us out." The fold drives activated, and we were gone before the first Veth picket vessel could bring its weapons online. Behind us, 240 ships drifted in the dark, intact and unharmed, and would restart in approximately 90 minutes, and their crews would spend the rest of their lives knowing exactly what had happened here and exactly why. I turned in my chair and looked at the main display, which was showing a relay of the conclave frequency. 11 species had already transmitted formal requests for direct communication with Earth Command. 3 of them were species I recognized from the conclave gallery 11 years ago, sitting in their sections, watching the vote pass unanimously. They had been quiet then. They were not quiet now. I asked Nina to record a response to all 11 simultaneously. She pulled up the channel and nodded. This is Commander Arlen Voss of the Earth Sovereignty Fleet operating under the authority of the Prometheus Command Council, I said. We have received your communication requests. We will respond to each one individually within 24 hours for any conclave member who wishes to understand what Earth is asking for. I will tell you now, we are not asking for apologies. We are not asking for recognition of a wrong that everyone in this galaxy already knows was committed. We are asking for the immediate release of all human civilians held in labor status across all conclave adjacent systems, reparations in material and technology to be negotiated directly, and a formal revision of conclave membership protocols to prevent any future member species from being managed in the way that Earth was managed. I paused. We are also asking the Veth Dominion to appear before the conclave investigative chamber within 30 days. We have the evidence. The chamber can have it. Another pause. Earth did not come here to make enemies. We came here because we ran out of patience. There is a difference. We hope the conclave can understand it. I ended the transmission. On the main screen, a 12th species had joined the list of communication requests. Then a 13th. Nina looked at the list and said quietly, that's a lot of people who want to talk to us. Good, I said. I did not say anything else for a while. I sat in my chair and let the fleet carry us through the dark, and I thought about a morning 11 years ago when I had drunk real coffee from Brazil and read a treaty and believed that what was about to happen was the most important moment in human history. I had been right about that. I had just been wrong about which moment it was. The moment was this one. The conclave emergency session was called within 8 hours of our engagement at the Veth border system. That was by conclave standards approximately the speed of light. They typically took 3 weeks to call a session and another 2 to open it. The fact that they moved in 8 hours told me something useful. They were afraid not of our weapons. They had seen what we chose not to do with our weapons. What they were afraid of was the recording of Dret's communication. What they were afraid of was the firmware evidence. What they were afraid of was accountability, which is always the thing that power fears most, because power can defend itself against force, and it cannot defend itself against truth. I received the session notification on the Reckoning's bridge and read it to Nina, who was eating a meal for the first time in 19 hours and doing it at her console because she was that kind of person. They want a ceasefire declaration before the session, she said without looking up. We have not fired on anyone, I said. There is nothing to cease. She smiled at that. It was a small smile, the kind that lives in the corner of the mouth. Over the next 4 days, the communication requests multiplied. The 13 became 22. The 22 became 31. Not all of them were friendly. 4 species sent communications that were formally described as expressions of concern, but that read clearly as warnings. Earth was disrupting the established order. Earth was acting outside recognized channels. Earth should consider the instability it was creating. I sent each of those 4 a personal response. It was the same response for each. We are aware of the instability. I wrote, we created it deliberately. We would like to invite you to consider who created the instability that preceded ours and whether that instability was ever formally addressed. None of them wrote back. That was fine. The ones who did write back warmly were more interesting. By the second day, 3 species had sent us not just communication requests, but physical vessels. A supply ship from a species called the Keth arrived at our formation's edge, broadcasting an open cargo manifest and a message in English that they had apparently been working on for some time. Based on how careful the grammar was, the message said, "We also remember." I had the ship brought alongside and met its captain, a being named Advisor Lawn, in the Reckoning's forward bay. Advisor Lawn was small and moved very carefully with the particular deliberateness of someone who has learned not to make quick movements around beings larger than themselves. The Keth had been conclave members for 60 years. They had never been attacked the way we were attacked, but they had been managed as I had used the word in ways that their public statements had never been allowed to say directly. They were saying it now. By the 3rd day, the Keth were joined by 2 other species, then a 4th, then a 5th. By the time the conclave session opened, we had 7 species who had formally and publicly aligned their communication channels with Earth. Command, not military allies, not a war coalition, something more durable. Political solidarity built on shared experience. I called it the corridor block in my notes. Nina told me that name was terrible. I kept using it anyway. The full conclave fleet response came on the 4th day. I want to be clear about the scale of it. The conclave had not mobilized a unified fleet since a boundary war 90 years earlier between 2 of its larger member species. The fleet they assembled and sent toward Earth's operational area numbered 1,100 warships representing contributions from 27 member species. It was by any measure the largest military formation in current galactic history. 1,100 ships. We had 1,400. But that was not the number that mattered. The number that mattered was this: 7 of those 27 contributing species had privately contacted Earth Command in the last 48 hours to express their discomfort with the deployment. Not their refusal, but their discomfort. They were in the fleet because conclave membership required participation in collective security actions. They were not in the fleet because they believed in what it was doing. 7 species flying under orders they did not fully support. I spent 6 hours reading every piece of intelligence we had on the formation, its command structure, the species composition of each wing, the personal histories of the senior commanders. I read it with Henry Ward, who had been commanding our 2nd Tactical Division, and Carol Green, who had come aboard the Reckoning 3 days before launch and had not left since because she said she was not going to build something for 11 years and then watch it from the moon. They are going to come through the Corridor Junction, Henry said, pointing at the display. There is no other approach that makes tactical sense. The junction is the only place wide enough for a formation that size. And the junction is where we need them, I said. Carol was looking at the display from her chair, her left hand moving a stylus across a calculation she had been running since morning. The fold drive performance at the junction will be affected by the gravitational gradient from the binary, she said. Not critically, but the transit time from fold entry to position will be 3 seconds longer than standard. 3 seconds, Henry said. I know, Carol said. I have been trying to reduce it for 4 days. 3 seconds is what we have. 3 seconds inside an enemy formation, before your weapons are online and your position is known. That is not a lot, but it is something. And in a formation as large and multi-species as the Conclave fleet, with 7 of those species already uncertain about why they were there, 3 seconds of pure confusion might be more valuable than any weapon we carried. We moved the fleet to the corridor junction and waited. They arrived on the second day, dropping out of their own jump sequence in a formation so large that the scanner display had to be rescaled twice to show it properly. 1,100 ships. It looked like a city moving through space. It looked like the end of an argument. The Conclave fleet commander was a being named High Admiral Thren from the oldest member species in the Conclave, the same species that had written the founding charter and had been running the institution ever since. Thren hailed us with the formal language of the Conclave security protocol, the specific phrase that translated as submit to collective authority and no harm will come. I had been waiting for that phrase for 11 years. Admiral Thren, I said, I would like to introduce you to something. I gave the signal. The fold drives activated across 400 reckoning-class vessels simultaneously. One moment we were in our holding formation at the edge of the junction. The next moment, 400 human ships were inside the Conclave formation, distributed across its wings, emerging between and beside and in the middle of its component squadrons at distances that no Conclave navigator would have calculated as possible, because no Conclave ship could fold from outside a formation to inside it in 3 seconds. We were not firing. I want to be absolutely clear about that. 400 ships materialized inside the largest military fleet in current galactic history, and not one of them opened fire. What they did was broadcast. Every vessel was transmitting the same package simultaneously on every frequency. The jet recording, the firmware documentation, the Conclave's internal communications about the management of Earth over the previous 40 years, including 3 documents from the Conclave Secretariat that used the specific phrase necessary containment to describe Earth's status in the Alliance. Those documents had been shared with us by one of the 7 uncomfortable species in the fleet. They had sent them the night before. 1,100 ships, and the formation went from ordered to fractured in under 4 minutes. Not because we fought them, because 7 species in that fleet received transmissions from their home governments within those 4 minutes. Governments that had been watching the broadcast. Governments that were suddenly facing their own populations, asking questions about necessary containment and what exactly their Membership in this institution had required of them. 4 wings of the conclave fleet broke formation and moved to neutral distance. Not to our side, not to attack, simply away out of the engagement zone, holding position and awaiting orders. The remaining formation was still large. 700 warships, give or take, still committed and still following Thren's orders. They began to maneuver into a tighter configuration, attempting to consolidate our remaining 1,000 ships which had held outside the fold formation during the fold insertion, now moved to complete encirclement, not a tight encirclement, room to breathe. We were not trapping anyone. We were demonstrating the geometry of the situation. Henry's voice came over the internal channel. They are holding position. No weapons fire initiated. Good, I said. Let's keep it that way. I opened the channel to Thren. Admiral, I said, you have a choice. You can engage us, and this becomes the worst day in conclave history for reasons that have nothing to do with the outcome of the battle, or you can stand down, and this becomes the day the conclave demonstrated that it is capable of correcting its own failures. I waited. I would very much prefer the second option. I think most of the species in your formation would also prefer it. I think if you are honest with yourself, you know that what was done to humanity was wrong, and you know that the organization you represent has been protecting the people who did it for 11 years. Silence on the channel. No one has fired a weapon today, I said. No one has been harmed. That is Earth's choice. We would like it to remain Earth's choice. Thren's voice, when it came, was quiet. The translation made it flat, but I had been listening to translated voices for long enough to hear the weight underneath. What are your terms? He said. I will transmit them in writing, I said. In full, with a 72-hour window for conclave consideration. And GT snorts. And GT, all we ask is that you read them. I ended the channel and turned to Nina. Transmit the terms, I said. She had them ready. She had written the first draft herself 3 years ago, and we had revised it together 17 times since. It was clean and clear and specific, and did not ask for a single thing that was not directly connected to what had been taken. She sent it. Around us in the junction, 1,100 ships held their positions, and the stars were very still and very quiet, and somewhere in the formation a 7 species delegation was watching a broadcast that was also going out on every civilian frequency in this part of the galaxy. And I thought about a council chamber on Conclave Station where a vote had passed unanimously 11 years ago, while a man named Dreth was already walking away from his seat. The galaxy had watched us fall. Now it was watching us stand, and it had not looked away. The conclave negotiation chamber was a room designed to make you feel small. I had been in it before, 11 years ago. During the final sessions of the Sovereignty Accords, the ceiling rose 30 m above the floor, and the walls were inlaid with the seals of every member species, and the table at the center was long enough that the beings at the far end appeared small even to each other. I think the effect was intentional. I think the room was built to remind whoever entered it that they were one voice among many, and that the many had been here longer, and that the weight of history was a physical thing you could feel pressing down from those high walls. I walked in alone. That was my choice. I had the authority to bring Henry, Nina, a full legal delegation, a security detail. I brought none of them. I had thought about it for a long time, and I kept arriving at the same conclusion. The room was designed to make you feel small, and the answer to that was not to bring more people to feel small alongside you. The answer was to walk in by yourself, without armor, and let the room be what it was. Nina had asked me that morning if I was sure. I'm sure, I said. If something goes wrong in there, then you have the fleet, I said, and you know what to do with it. She had looked at me for a moment in the way that people who have worked together through difficult things look at each other when they run out of practical objections. Don't let them reframe the conversation, she said. I won't, I said. The conclave governing body was present in full. 39 species seated in their designated positions around the long table. Some of them I recognized from the ceremony 11 years ago. Some were new representatives at the far end in the position designated for the presiding member sat High Admiral Thrin, now serving in the civilian governance role that the conclave's charter allowed. During security review periods, 4 of the 7 corridor block species were also present, seated in a separate observer section to the right. Advisor Lon of the Caith nodded when I entered. I nodded back. I took the single chair that had been placed at the human end of the table. It was slightly lower than the others. I noticed that. I sat in it anyway. The presiding speaker, a being from one of the older species whose name I will not attempt to render in English, opened the session with formal language. Agenda: the humanitarian claims of the Human Sovereignty Fleet, terms presented by Commander Arlen Voss, consideration of the Prometheus Command Councils, standing as a recognized entity. I let the formality run its course. Then the speaker invited me to speak. I thought about what to say. I had written a speech, 3 of them in fact. I had gone to sleep the night before, reading the 3rd one, which was the best of them in the opinion of everyone who had read all 3. I did not give the speech. You know why we are here, I said. You know what was done, and you know who did it, and you know that your institution's response over the last 11 years was not adequate. I am not going to spend time on that. We have submitted the documentation. The chamber will rule on the specifics. What I want to tell you is what we are asking for and why. I looked around the table. 39 species. Some of them had been present when the vote passed. Some of them had been part of the conversations about necessary containment. Some of them had, I knew from the documents we had received, raised quiet objections at the time that were noted in the records and then set aside. We want our people returned, I said. All of them, every human being currently held in labor status in any system connected to this conclave, not transferred, not relocated, returned to Earth or to the colonies, which will be restored to human governance immediately. This is not a negotiable point. It is the starting condition. A sound moved around the table. Not protest, something more like recognition. We want reparations, I said. Material and technological. The specific list has been submitted. It represents what was taken from us in terms of infrastructure and economic capacity during 11 years of restricted trade. We are not asking for more than that. We are asking for equivalent replacement, a calculation not a punishment. I paused. And we are asking for one change to the Conclave Charter, I said. Article 47, the provisional membership. Provision which allows existing members to impose management protocols on newly admitted species for stability. Transition period, that article is how. What was done to us was done within the technical language of your own rules. We are asking for it to be removed. The table was quiet. A representative near the middle, from a species I recognized as having been one of the four that sent the warning communications earlier in the week, said, "You are asking for a structural change to an institution that predates humanity's space travel by several centuries." Yes, I said. On what basis do you claim the standing to demand that? I looked at him. On the basis that we are standing here, I said. A longer quiet. Then from the observer section, advisor Lon of the Caith said something in their native language. The translation came through a half-second later. The Caith support the removal of Article 47, Lon said. We have wanted to raise this matter for 30 years. We are raising it now. Another species in the observer section spoke, then a third, the corridor block. One by one, putting their support on the record. The governing body began to respond. Voices rising and falling, species protocols exchanging, the machinery of a very old institution processing something it had not expected to have to process. I sat in my slightly lower chair and let it run, and I thought about 11 years in a room under the moon and Carol Green's cold coffee and a young man named Oliver Hayes standing in a dark corridor saying, "They're all dark, sir," and a word broadcast into an encrypted frequency in the deep band spectrum. Then a conclave representative from one of the larger member species, one who had not spoken yet, addressed me directly. "Commander Voss," she said, "if we meet these terms, all of them including the charter revision, what does Earth do with its fleet?" It was the question I had known was coming, the question that every power in that room needed answered before they could move in any direction. I looked at her. She was watching me with the specific attention of someone who was going to remember exactly what I said. "Earth keeps its fleet," I said, "as every other member species keeps its fleet. We will not reduce our capacity on request any more than you would reduce yours. But a fleet that exists is not a fleet that is deployed. We came here because we had no other option. We are not here because we want to be at war with this institution. We are here because we want to exist in it on terms that are honest." She was quiet for a moment. "And if we refuse any of your terms?" I let the silence hold for a beat. "Then we will come back," I said, "and we will bring more of the documentation. We have a great deal of it." I did not say this as a threat. I said it as a fact in the same tone I would use to describe a navigational constraint. That was the tone I wanted. Not anger, not performance, just the quiet certainty of someone who has already decided what they will do and is simply informing the other party. The session lasted 9 hours. I will not recount every exchange. Some of it was procedure, some of it was the kind of political maneuvering that happens in any room with 39 parties trying to reach a position they can each take home and describe as acceptable to their own people. What came out of it was this: the return of human civilians began within 48 hours. Of the sessions close, organized, through a joint transport protocol that the Caith offered to oversee as a neutral party. The reparations agreement went to a working group with a 90-day mandate, which was not fast but which was real and documented. The charter revision was flagged for formal proceedings, which meant it was not guaranteed, but which meant it was on the record in a way that could not be quietly set aside again. And the Veith Dominion's representative appeared before the investigative chamber 6 days later with Dreth listed as a primary subject of inquiry. I did not attend that proceeding. I was on the reckoning. We stayed in the system during the transport operations, not to oversee them, but because our presence meant they happened. That is the difference between having a fleet and using one. Sometimes the having is sufficient. The first transport returned to Earth orbit 22 days after the session. It carried 6,300 people from the Kepler colonies, the youngest of them born in labor facilities and old enough now to walk off the ship themselves. I watched the feed from Earth's surface relay as they came down the ramp and stood on ground that their parents had described to them but that they had never touched. I am not going to try to describe what that looked like. Some things are not improved by description. Nina found me at the viewport sometime after midnight ship time. She had been running coordination for 14 days without a full sleep period, and she looked like it, but she stood next to me and we both watched the feed for a while without saying anything. Eventually she said, "That's the fourth transport." "I know," I said. "There are 11 more scheduled." "I know." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Is this what winning feels like?" I thought about it honestly. "I don't know," I said. "I think winning is the wrong word for it. Winning implies that there was a game and one side got a higher score. What we did was more like a debt being paid. It doesn't feel like a score. It feels like a weight that was lifted but left a mark where it was." She considered that, "But we're not going back to the way things were." "No," I said, "we are not going back to the way things were." The fifth transport was confirmed en route on the display behind us. Then the sixth, the long work of return, was running steadily in the dark, and somewhere out in the galaxy the Conclave was processing the fact that it had a new kind of member species now, one that had demonstrated both what it was capable of and what it chose to be, and that distinction was going to sit inside that institution for a long time. I thought about what Nina had asked me. Is this what winning feels like? I thought about 4,000 people recovered from a dark border system, about 11 transports scheduled, about a charter provision being debated in the conclave chamber for the first time in recorded history, about Advisor Lon's nod when I walked into the room, about Carol Green watching 1,400 ships rise from the moon. I thought about a young officer named Oliver Hayes standing in a dark corridor, doing his job. I turned from the viewport. "Get some sleep," I said to Nina. She started to argue, then she looked at the feed one more time and seemed to decide something. "You should too," she said. "I will," I said. She left. I stayed at the viewport while longer, not because I needed to, but because after 11 years of building toward this moment, it seemed wrong to walk away from it too quickly. The feed showed another ramp, another group of people, another piece of Something that had been broken and was not yet whole, but was at least being carried back to where it belonged. A young crew member had come up behind me without my noticing, the way they do on a quiet ship in the late hours. Her name was Dana Cole. She was 23 and she had been born in the lunar facility, which made her one of a small group of people who had never in their lives been anywhere other than this. She would see Earth for the first time. When we returned, "Commander," she said, "are we done?" I thought about everything that the word done could mean. The remaining transports, the working group, the charter proceedings, the slow, difficult years of rebuilding that would follow all of this when the adrenaline was gone and the work was just work, and the real measure of what we had become would be tested not in a single engagement, but in 10,000 ordinary decisions made by ordinary people trying to live in a galaxy that was not designed to welcome them. "No," I said, "we are not done." She nodded slowly, absorbing that. "But tonight," I said, "we got our people back." I looked at the feed one more time. "Tonight," I said, "that is enough." And for the first time in 11 years, I meant it.